Welcome back. Tonight, let us step softly into the dim glow of a London evening, where the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot stir quietly, already sensing that a mystery awaits. It was a quiet evening in the small village of St. Mary Mead, the kind of evening where the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and autumn leaves, and the streets seemed to hold their breath in anticipation of something. The old cottages, with their ivy-clad walls, stood silent and still, their windows glowing with the warmth of hearth fires and the soft murmur of domestic life within. But in one of the grander homes, where the lamps flickered softly under the weight of the evening shadows, an unsettling sense of unease stirred the air. Lady Cordelia St, Clair, the gracious hostess of the midnight tea soirée, stood at her window, gazing out at the darkening horizon. The night felt different, heavier somehow, as if the very walls of St. Clair Manor were whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. As the clock struck the hour of midnight, a sharp, jagged scream pierced the stillness of the night, echoing through the manor's ancient halls. In the next room, a silver key lay forgotten on the floor, its polished surface reflecting a light that seemed too bright for such an hour. A few moments later, the manor was quiet again. But in the dead of night, nothing stays silent for long, especially not in a house with so many secrets. Chapter 1. The Gathering at St. Clair Manor. The quiet of the English countryside was broken only by the occasional rustle of the autumn breeze weaving through the ancient oak trees of St. Clair Manor. The long gravel drive, lined with towering hedgerows, was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns as the evening mist began to settle. A grand house, old as the hills yet meticulously maintained, loomed ahead. Its stone facade, adorned with ivy and hidden secrets, stood as a testament to the family that had called it home for generations. The manor's mistress, Lady Cordelia St. Clair, a woman of particular tastes and peculiarities, had invited a select group of people to partake in an evening unlike any other. It was not a dinner party or a simple gathering, no. This would be a midnight tea soirée, an event draped in mystery and luxury, designed to intrigue the finest of guests. Among those invited was a man who required little introduction, Hercule Poirot, the famous Belgian detective whose reputation had already preceded him by the time he accepted the invitation, arrived at the manor just as the clock in the grand hall struck 7. His presence was as commanding as it was unassuming. The small, meticulous man with a flair for precision and a razor-sharp mind, dressed in his signature suit and bow tie, entered the drawing room where the event had been set. Lady Cordelia was already seated, her demeanor one of poised elegance, although her eyes betrayed a restless air, darting about as if expecting something or someone to enter at any moment. The guests were gathering, each of them holding some level of curiosity about the gathering, the odd time, and the enigmatic invitation. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, how delightful of you to join us!" Lady Cordelia greeted him with a warm but strained smile. "I hope the journey was not too taxing." Poirot's eyes scanned the room with their usual keen perception before he answered, "It was a most pleasant journey, madam. Though, I must say, the invitation you extended intrigued me, and I could not resist. Midnight tea, you say? An unusual, but certainly captivating choice." "You see, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Cordelia replied, her voice dipping into something almost conspiratorial, "it is not just a tea. It is a gathering of minds, a meeting of, well, We shall see what it becomes." Her eyes swept across the room as if daring someone to disagree with her cryptic statement. Poirot, ever the observer, took in the guests one by one. There was Sir Reginald Hayward, a large man with an even larger ego, dressed in a suit of velvet that practically screamed aristocracy. His hands, though typically the model of composure, trembled slightly as he adjusted his monocle. His eyes darted nervously between the others, though he never allowed his tongue to falter. He had once been a man of considerable wealth, but whispers had begun to swirl about his dwindling fortunes, a fate he seemed to avoid. Speaking of directly, then there was Miss Vera Bellamy, a striking young woman with hair the color of gold leaves in autumn and a face that could enchant the most stoic of men. But behind her beauty was something darker, a sharp intelligence that made her as capable of disarming a room with her wit as with her smile. She had been introduced to the social circuit only recently, but her presence in this particular gathering suggested there was more to her than just her outward allure. Not far from Miss Bellamy was Dr. Edwin Barnes, an unsettling figure dressed in dark attire. His pale face and thin lips gave him an air of intellectual superiority, the kind of man whose thoughts seemed forever caught in some far-off world of scientific discovery. He often brooded silently over the tea, his sharp eyes taking in every detail, but never speaking more than necessary. Lastly, there was Gerald Thompson, a man in his early 30s, whose charm was as refined as his tailored suit. He exuded an easy confidence, but there was a hardness beneath the polished surface. His relationship with Lady Cordelia was known to be more than that of just a casual acquaintance, though no one spoke of it openly. Poirot's presence did not go unnoticed. The guests, though not entirely unfamiliar with the famed detective, were still uncertain of what exactly had brought him here. No one was above suspicion in the eyes of Poirot, and no one was entirely sure what secrets the Belgian might uncover. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," said Lady Cordelia, drawing his attention back to her. "You are the last to arrive, but no matter. We are all here now. Please take a seat. Tea shall be served soon." Poirot, with his usual politeness, took his seat at the long table, noticing how each of the guests had positioned themselves with a careful precision that suggested more than a simple social gathering. There was an air of restraint, a peculiar tension that seemed to vibrate just beneath the surface. The servants brought in silver trays of delicate porcelain teacups, filled with the finest Earl Grey, and platters of small cakes and biscuits, each one crafted with perfection. Yet Poirot could not shake the sense that something was amiss. The conversation, while polite, was strangely stilted, as though the guests were all holding something back. As the tea was poured, the chime of the clock echoed through the manor. Midnight was fast approaching. Miss Bellamy, who had been watching Poirot carefully, leaned slightly toward him. "Tell me, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice as smooth as velvet, "do you believe that the people we choose to associate with tell us something about ourselves?" Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Ah, mademoiselle, it is not just the people we associate with that speak of our true nature. It is the ones we avoid that reveal the most. But that is a conversation for another time." Gerald Thompson chuckled, but there was something forced about his mirth. "A mysterious man, Poirot. Are we to expect one of your famous deductions tonight?" Poirot met his gaze steadily. "I do not claim to know all, monsieur. But I can assure you I shall be watching, always watching." The conversation carried on as the clock's hands neared midnight, the tension rising with each passing second. But before the hour could strike, a sudden, shrill scream shattered the fragile peace. Everyone in the room froze. Lady Cordelia was gone. Chapter 2. The First Clue. The clock struck midnight with a deep, resonating chime, the sound echoing through the grand hall of Clair Manor. At that moment, an unsettling stillness seemed to descend upon the guests. Time itself appeared to hold its breath. Poirot sat at the edge of the gathering, his mind racing through a labyrinth of observations. The evening had been filled with small talk, each sentence layered with a subtle tension. Yet there was something beyond these social pleasantries, a sense of foreboding that neither words nor actions could disguise. The guests were outwardly polite, but their actions, their glances, spoke volumes. Lady Cordelia was anxious, Sir Reginald was restless, Miss Bellamy seemed increasingly preoccupied, and Dr. Barnes, Dr. Barnes appeared the most serene, though serenity in a man like him could be deceptive. Lady Cordelia glanced at the clock and then at the door, her lips pressed in a thin line. She seemed on edge. "It is nearly time for the next course, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice attempting to sound casual, but there was a quiver in it. Poirot smiled warmly, but he knew that there was something far more important than dinner on her mind. "Ah, madame, I believe it is not the dinner that is weighing on your thoughts. Perhaps there is something else you are expecting, something far more pressing?" Before Lady Cordelia could respond, the shrill sound of a scream echoed through the manor, so piercing it shattered the calm of the room. It was not a scream of excitement or laughter, but one that hinted at something far darker. The guests jumped from their seats, startled and confused. For a moment, the sound seemed to hang in the air, suspended. Poirot's hand instinctively reached for the edge of the table, his mind immediately working in overdrive. The scream had come from the hallway, just beyond the parlor doors. "Lady Cordelia, stay here," Miss Bellamy cried, her voice filled with alarm. But before she could even take a step, Poirot was already moving. Poirot's keen senses had already taken in the reactions of those around him. The fear on Sir Reginald's face was almost palpable, while Gerald Thompson seemed oddly calm, his expression betraying little emotion, though his eyes darted about nervously. Dr. Barnes remained in his seat, his lips pressed tightly together, his gaze unwavering. It was as if he had already anticipated something. Poirot took swift, deliberate steps toward the source of the scream, with the others trailing behind him in a flurry of disarray. The grand hall was dimly lit, the soft golden light from the chandeliers casting long shadows on the cold stone floors. As they rounded the corner, Poirot caught sight of Lady Cordelia's slender figure crumpled against the floor, her hand clutching something tightly. Her face was ashen, her breath shallow, as if she had been overcome by some sudden shock. Poirot kneeled beside her, his trained eyes scanning her for any signs of injury, but there were none. She had fainted, that much was clear, but it was the object in her hand that drew Poirot's attention. The small silver key, cold and unadorned, engraved with an intricate symbol that seemed familiar but didn't quite fit. It was the type of key that shouldn't have been there. "Lady Cordelia," Poirot murmured, gently shaking her by the shoulder. "Can you hear me?" "What has happened?" The woman's eyelids fluttered open slowly, her gaze unfocused at first. Then, as her eyes settled on Poirot's face, recognition flickered, followed by a look of deep concern. "Poirot," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not what it seems. I didn't know who to trust, but now it's too late." Her words were fragmented, strained by fear and exhaustion. Poirot moved quickly, signaling the servants to fetch some water, while Miss Bellamy knelt down beside him, clearly distressed. "Lady Cordelia," Poirot repeated softly, "tell me, what happened? Why are you in such distress? Who has harmed you?" I was looking for something," Lady Cordelia continued, her voice trembling. "Something that has been lost for so long, but I found it, and now I wish I hadn't." Her eyes darted to the silver key in her hand, the object clearly at the heart of her panic. Poirot examined it more closely, noting the unusual engraving that had caused his pulse to quicken. It wasn't just a decorative trinket. This key had significance, something deeper, perhaps tied to the secrets buried in the manor. "What do you mean, you found it, madame?" Poirot asked, his voice calm but insistent. Lady Cordelia closed her eyes again, taking several shallow breaths. "I shouldn't have told anyone. I thought I could handle it, but now—" She trailed off, her gaze distant, as though her mind was lost in something far more troubling. Poirot's mind raced. A key, a woman in distress, and a house full of secrets. The connections were too many to ignore. But something was off. Lady Cordelia had known more than she had let on. She had been hiding something, and this key was undoubtedly a part of it. Suddenly, there was a sharp sound, the faint click of a door. Poirot's attention snapped to the side as Gerald Thompson emerged from the shadows of the hallway, his face pale but composed. "What has happened?" he asked, his voice low. "Is she—" "She will recover, but she is troubled," Poirot replied, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "And you, monsieur, you seem unperturbed. Why is that?" Gerald hesitated, then gave a tight-lipped smile. "I suppose I've seen enough of Lady Cordelia's eccentricities to not be surprised by such things." Poirot studied him carefully. There was something in Gerald's manner, his too perfect calmness, that made Poirot's suspicions grow. Just then, Doctor, Edwin Barnes appeared at the doorway, his calm demeanor standing in stark contrast to the chaos of the moment. "What has occurred here?" he asked, his voice smooth and measured, almost detached. Lady Cordelia's hand tightened around the key once more. "No, it cannot be him," she murmured to herself, though her words were barely audible. Poirot straightened up and turned to the others, his mind still working through the puzzle. The key, the distress, the strange silence in the room, all of it spoke to something much more dangerous than a simple fainting spell. "I shall need to speak with each of you," Poirot declared, his eyes sweeping across the room. "There are questions that must be answered." And as the clock struck again in the distance, echoing through the manor like the ticking of a countdown, Poirot's mind finally settled on the key's true meaning. Whatever had been set in motion by Lady Cordelia's discovery, it was now too late to stop. The game had begun. Chapter 3. Unearthing Motives. The evening was in turmoil, but in Poirot's mind, the puzzle was beginning to form its first rough outlines. The guests had gathered in the drawing-room, their faces filled with confusion and barely concealed anxiety. Lady Cordelia had been carried upstairs to rest, but the strange object she had clutched, the silver key, remained on the table in front of Poirot, its strange engraving now something of an obsession for him. The clock had struck again, signaling the passing of more minutes, but time had taken on a different meaning in that house. Everything felt suspended, as though the manor itself held its breath, waiting for the next move to be made. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes glancing at each guest: Gerald Thompson, Sir Reginald Hayward, Miss Vera Bellamy, and Dr. Edwin Barnes. Each of them seemed both agitated and oddly calm at the same time. It was a dichotomy Poirot was all too familiar with, and he knew that it could only mean one thing. They were all hiding something. "Madame," Poirot began, turning to Miss Bellamy, who had been particularly quiet since the incident, "you seemed quite disturbed when Lady Cordelia collapsed, yet you said nothing when the others arrived. What is it that you know, mademoiselle?" Miss Bellamy, her golden hair falling in gentle waves, hesitated. She had been standing by the window, her fingers nervously toying with the bracelet on her wrist. The tension in her shoulders was palpable as she met Poirot's gaze. I don't know what to tell you," she finally spoke, her voice wavering slightly. "Lady Cordelia's been acting strange for days now, more than just her usual eccentricities. She kept muttering about finding something important. She said she had discovered the truth behind her family's past, but—" She trailed off, and for the first time her mask slipped, revealing the anxiety that had been building within her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. This was the first real piece of information, though it raised more questions than answers. "Ah, you think that whatever Lady Cordelia discovered is the cause of her distress? That it has something to do with the key?" Poirot inquired, his voice gentle yet firm. Miss Bellamy nodded, though her gaze shifted uncomfortably as she spoke. "I'm not certain, but there were times when she seemed almost haunted by the idea, like she wanted to tell someone but was afraid to. And Gerald." She stopped short, her eyes flicking nervously toward the young man who was now standing at the far end of the room, his posture relaxed, yet his expression betraying a touch of impatience. Poirot, ever the keen observer, followed her gaze. Gerald Thompson had barely spoken since the incident. His usual charm and wit were replaced by a cool detachment that felt unnatural. "Ah, Monsieur Thompson," Poirot said, turning his attention to him, "perhaps you could enlighten us. You have been quite the quiet one tonight, despite your usual talkative nature. What, may I ask, is your relationship to Lady Cordelia, aside from what is apparent?" Gerald smiled, though it was thin and unconvincing. "I think you know, Poirot. I was a close friend of Lady Cordelia's. She was a woman with a lot of interests, many of them personal, and I simply tried to offer my assistance wherever it was needed. Nothing more, nothing less." Poirot studied Gerald closely. His calm, measured response was precisely what Poirot had come to expect from someone with something to hide. But it wasn't just Gerald's reaction that concerned Poirot. It was the subtle tension in the air, the way everyone had quickly fallen silent at the mention of Lady Cordelia's name. There was more here, much more. "And what of Sir Reginald?" Poirot asked, his gaze now moving toward the elderly aristocrat who was fidgeting with his cufflinks, his discomfort evident. "You appear a man of many words, yet your silence speaks volumes." Sir Reginald cleared his throat loudly, attempting to regain control of the room. "I hardly think my presence here is of much consequence, Poirot," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I'm just a guest, a friend of Lady Cordelia's family for many years. But as for tonight's events—" Poirot's lips curled into a subtle smile. "Ah, but you are mistaken, monsieur. It is your presence here that is of great consequence. You who have lived a life of privilege, yet you now appear rather unsettled. Was it not you who was recently in need of financial assistance, and who sought Lady Cordelia's support? Sir Reginald stiffened, his earlier bravado faltering under the weight of Poirot's direct questioning. "What are you insinuating, Poirot?" he demanded, his voice slightly trembling. "I have nothing to do with this." "Nothing at all." "Ah, but you do, monsieur," Poirot continued, his tone unwavering. "You were desperate, yes? And Lady Cordelia, ever the benefactor, was assisting you with more than just your estate, I presume. But what did you give in return? What was the price of her generosity?" Sir Reginald's face flushed, and for a moment Poirot saw something flicker in his eyes, a deep, buried fear that threatened to break through the veneer of his composed exterior. But just as quickly as it appeared, the emotion was gone, replaced by a defensive anger. "I had no part in this," Sir Reginald insisted, his voice now more forceful. "I've done nothing wrong." Poirot made no further comment, though his mind was already racing. The connections were there, scattered across the room like scattered puzzle pieces. Gerald Thompson had his charm and his mystery, but Sir Reginald's desperation was something more palpable. Could it be that Lady Cordelia had been more than a benefactor to him? Had there been a deeper, unspoken connection? The final guest, Dr. Edwin Barnes, had remained, silent through most of the exchange, but now his voice broke through the tension in the room like a sharp knife. "Poirot, if I may, Doctor." Barnes began, his voice calm and measured. "You seem to be insinuating that the answers lie within the guests themselves, but that's not the case. Lady Cordelia's actions were unpredictable. She had become obsessed with a family heirloom, something she believed held the answers to a long-forgotten secret. I warned her against it, but she wouldn't listen. I believe that is what has caused her distress." Poirot turned his gaze to Dr. Barnes, his eyes narrowing. "Ah, a family heirloom, you say? And this heirloom, does it too have something to do with this key?" Dr. Barnes hesitated, his fingers twitching slightly as he adjusted his spectacles. "Perhaps. Perhaps not. I only know what she confided in me. She believed that there were hidden secrets within the manor itself, secrets tied to her family's history. But she was ill-prepared to handle what she uncovered." Poirot felt a cold shiver run down his spine. There it was again, the key, the heirloom, the secret history of St. Clair Manor. It all seemed so connected, yet so elusive. "I shall need to see this heirloom, Doctor." "Barnes," Poirot said, his voice cold and steady. "Perhaps, then, the pieces will begin to fit." Chapter 4. An Unexpected Incident. The tension in the room was almost tangible as the guests exchanged wary glances, each one of them tightly holding their secrets like fragile glass. The gentle hum of the fireplace crackled in the background, providing a false sense of warmth and safety. But Poirot knew the truth. Beneath the veneer of calm, something was terribly wrong. "I must see this heirloom, Doctor." "Barnes," Poirot had insisted, his tone as sharp as ever, not giving an inch. The doctor, however, had shown no immediate reaction. Instead, he adjusted his spectacles in a deliberate, methodical motion, a habit that was far more telling than he knew. "Very well, Poirot, Doctor." Barnes replied with an air of reluctant acceptance. "I will show you the object in question, but I must warn you, it may not be what you expect." Poirot nodded curtly. I am not concerned with expectations, monsieur, only with the truth." The rest of the guests shifted uneasily, exchanging looks filled with unspoken words. Lady Cordelia's fainting spell had disrupted their carefully constructed facades, and now Poirot's questions seemed to peel back layers they were reluctant to expose. Without another word, Doctor Barnes led the way down a narrow corridor, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the manor. The others hesitated at first, but then, one by one, they followed. Gerald Thompson and Sir Reginald trailed behind, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. Miss Bellamy lingered just behind Poirot, glancing over her shoulder toward the room they had just left, as though to ensure they were not being followed. "Will this be enough, Poirot?" Dr. Barnes asked, his voice steady, but with a slight edge of impatience. Poirot did not respond immediately. Instead, he took in the grandeur of the hallway, noting the portraits that adorned the walls, old and faded, yet still holding an air of dominance. Each one of those faces had once lived, each one hiding its own secret, its own story. He was aware that in this house, stories were not simply written. They were etched into the very bones of the manor. They arrived at a small study at the end of the corridor, its door slightly ajar. Dr. Barnes opened it and stepped inside. Poirot entered last, his eyes immediately falling on a large, heavy wooden desk in the center of the room. Beneath a glass display case on the desk lay an object that was unmistakable in its antiquity, a small, intricately carved box, covered with symbols that seemed both foreign and familiar. The faint light of the study's single lamp glinted off its surface, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. "This is the heirloom?" Poirot asked, his voice thick with intrigue. Dr. Barnes nodded, his hand resting near the box, as though he were unwilling to let it out of his sight. "It is indeed, Poirot. This box has been in Lady Cordelia's family for generations, but it's more than just a relic of the past. She believed it held the key to something larger than all of us." Poirot took a step closer, inspecting the box carefully. The symbols were strange, like those of an ancient civilization, though he couldn't place them just yet. He turned to Dr. Barnes. "And you," Poirot began, his gaze piercing, "you believe this box holds the truth that Lady Cordelia uncovered?" Dr. Barnes looked uncomfortable for the first time since the beginning of their conversation. "I do not know. But she was obsessed with it, Poirot. She was convinced that it contained the answers to some deep, hidden truth about her family's origins. But every time she opened it, nothing ever seemed to make sense." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And you did nothing to stop her, monsieur?" Dr. Barnes hesitated. "Lady Cordelia had her own mind, Poirot. I could only advise her. But in the end, she did as she pleased." Poirot studied the box for a moment longer, his mind racing. There was something important about this heirloom. He could feel it, just beneath the surface. Just as Poirot turned to speak, there was a loud crash from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps. Gerald Thompson burst into the room, his face pale and stricken with fear. "Poirot!" "You have to come quickly," he gasped, breathless. "It's Lady Cordelia. She's gone missing." Chapter 5. The Chase Begins. The news hit Poirot like a thunderclap, but his exterior remained calm, his every movement deliberate. "Gone missing, monsieur?" "What do you mean?" Gerald's eyes were wide with panic as he spoke quickly. "I went to check on her, as I promised. The door was ajar, and when I went inside, She was gone, disappeared without a trace. I've searched the whole upstairs, but there's no sign of her." Poirot stood up straight, his sharp mind already piecing together the various threads of the evening. "You are certain she is not in the house?" "Positive. There's no sign of her anywhere. I checked the library, the drawing room, and the corridor outside her room," Gerald exclaimed, visibly shaken. Poirot did not waste a moment. He motioned for the others to stay behind, then turned to Dr. "Barnes, stay here, please. I will need you to keep an eye on the heirloom. Do not touch it again until I return." Dr. Barnes nodded quickly, though his discomfort was evident. "Understood, Poirot." As Poirot stepped out into the hallway, followed closely by Gerald, his mind was already shifting through possibilities. Where would Lady Cordelia have gone? She had fainted only a short time ago, and yet she had vanished without a trace. Was this a simple case of disorientation, or was there something more sinister at play? The search began immediately, with the servants scouring the manor from top to bottom. Gerald was frantically running from room to room, his voice shaking as he called out Lady Cordelia's name. But Poirot was calm, his steps measured and purposeful. He knew that Lady Cordelia had not simply wandered off. The disappearance was a deliberate act, one that was bound to reveal itself in time. Poirot's eyes flicked toward the grand staircase. His intuition told him that there was something more to the manor than met the eye, something hidden away, perhaps in plain sight. It was as if the house itself was conspiring to keep its secrets, forcing Poirot to dig deeper, to unearth the truth, one layer at a time. As the minutes passed, Poirot's mind worked tirelessly, his thoughts focused on the events that had unfolded so far. The silver key, the heirloom, the cryptic words of Lady Cordelia. It all seemed to fit into a larger puzzle, one whose pieces had just begun to fall into place. The clock, ever present, ticked on. Chapter 6. The Red Herrings. The house seemed to close in on Poirot as the search continued. The air was thick with anxiety, and the guests, though still present in the manor, seemed to be more restless than ever. The servants had scoured every room, yet Lady Cordelia's whereabouts remained a mystery. The only sound that could be heard was the distant ticking of the clock, echoing through the manor like a cruel reminder of the passing time. Poirot had grown accustomed to such moments of tension, where every detail seemed like a clue, and yet nothing made sense. It was the nature of his work to find patterns where others saw only chaos. But tonight it felt different. Something was wrong, not just with Lady Cordelia's disappearance, but with the entire evening. There were pieces to this puzzle that had not yet come into focus, and it was those pieces Poirot needed to find. "I don't understand it," Gerald Thompson muttered, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "She couldn't have gone far. I checked the grounds myself. The entire estate is surrounded by a high wall, and no one could have slipped past without being seen." Poirot turned to Gerald, his eyes narrowing with thought. "You say you checked the grounds, but did you check every possible hiding place? Every nook and cranny?" Gerald opened his mouth to respond, but Poirot cut him off. "Did you check the cellar?" Poirot asked, his voice calm but firm. "The cellar?" Gerald echoed, his face a picture of confusion. No, I didn't. I thought—" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, monsieur, one must always think of the places that are most easily overlooked. The cellar, the attic, the hidden doors. These are the places where secrets are often kept." Gerald seemed momentarily flustered, but he quickly recovered. I'll go check it now." "You—" He began to turn toward the stairs, but Poirot stopped him with a raised hand. "No, monsieur. I shall go. You stay here. I need to speak with the others." Gerald hesitated but nodded reluctantly. Poirot turned toward the stairs, his footsteps light but purposeful, as he ascended the staircase. As he moved through the dimly lit corridors, his mind raced, pulling together the threads of the mystery. Lady Cordelia's disappearance was not a coincidence. That much was certain. But why had she vanished? Was it out of fear, or had she been taken? The key, the heirloom, the strange symbols, these were not mere distractions. They were part of a larger game, one that Poirot had yet to fully understand. The cellar door was at the far end of the hallway, tucked away behind a thick velvet curtain. Poirot approached it cautiously, his hand resting lightly on the doorknob. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him, the tension in the air almost palpable. Slowly, he turned the knob and opened the door. The cellar was dark, the air cool and musty. A faint smell of mildew clung to the stone walls, but Poirot's keen eyes adjusted quickly. The light from the lantern he carried flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. As he moved deeper into the cellar, his mind kept working, sifting through possibilities. Was Lady Cordelia hiding here? Or was she simply an innocent victim caught in a larger scheme? As Poirot moved further, he noticed something unusual. There, on the far wall, was a hidden alcove, its entrance covered by a pile of old crates. With practiced ease, Poirot moved the crates aside, revealing a narrow, dark passageway leading deeper into the manor's underbelly. His pulse quickened. This was no ordinary cellar. This was a passage to something else, something that had been hidden for a long time. Poirot stood still for a moment, his mind working through the implications. He knew then that he was about to uncover something that would change everything. With a steady hand, Poirot began to walk down the passage, his lantern casting flickering light on the stone walls as he moved forward. The air grew colder, and the passage seemed to stretch on forever. Then, at last, he reached a small wooden door. It was old, the wood weathered with time, but it was still intact. Poirot paused for a moment, taking in the situation. Something about this door felt significant. This was where the mystery began to feel more real, more tangible. The key, the heirloom, Lady Cordelia's strange behavior, all of it seemed to point to this very moment. With a firm but careful hand, Poirot turned the doorknob and stepped inside. The room beyond was small, its walls lined with shelves filled with dusty books and old family heirlooms. A desk sat in the center of the room, cluttered with papers, maps, and what appeared to be old journals. At first glance it seemed like a simple storage space, nothing more than a forgotten corner of the manor. But as Poirot's eyes scanned the room, he noticed something more, something out of place. On the desk, half hidden beneath a pile of old papers, was a photograph. Poirot approached it cautiously, his heart beating a little faster. He picked it up, turning it over to examine the back. There, written in Lady Cordelia's unmistakable hand, was a single sentence. "The truth is buried beneath the floorboards." Poirot's mind raced. "The truth," he whispered to himself, turning the photograph over once more. It showed a group of people all standing together in front of St. Clair Manor. They were dressed in formal attire, smiling for the camera. But as Poirot studied the image more closely, he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. In the center of the photograph was a man, one who should not have been there. The man's face was familiar, too familiar. It was Dr. Edwin Barnes. Chapter 7. The Twisting Path. Poirot stood in the hidden room, his mind reeling from the discovery, the photograph, the cryptic message, and the undeniable presence of Dr. Edwin Barnes in the picture all pointed to something far more sinister than he had originally anticipated. His fingers lingered on the edges of the image, as if hoping to uncover more than what the photograph revealed. It was a moment of realization. Lady Cordelia had known more than she had ever let on. And now, with her sudden disappearance, everything was connected. He took a step back, his thoughts churning like a storm. The key, the heirloom, the strange behavior of the guests, and the missing lady, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. The manor was hiding something, and it wasn't just a matter of old family secrets. No, this was something darker, something far more dangerous. The cryptic message on the back of the photograph was clear. The truth is buried beneath the floorboards. Poirot turned sharply toward the desk, where the pile of journals and papers still lay. He had no intention of leaving this room until he had more answers. With deliberate care, he began to sift through the scattered pages. As he flipped through the first few journals, they appeared to be nothing more than records of the Saint. Clair family's estate. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. But then, near the back, his fingers brushed against something harder, a small hidden compartment built into the underside of the desk. Poirot's pulse quickened. He gently pressed the secret latch, and the compartment swung open. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, was a small wooden box. It was intricately carved, the symbols on its surface matching those he had seen earlier on the key and the heirloom. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The key to the mystery was finally within his reach. With a steady hand, Poirot lifted the box and carefully opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a small journal. The pages were yellowed with age, the writing barely legible, but Poirot's trained eyes could decipher it. It was a diary, and it appeared to belong to none other than Lady Cordelia herself. The first entry was dated many years ago, and the words were hurried, almost frantic. "I have found it. The secret that has been buried for centuries, hidden by my ancestors. The key, the heirloom, everything they said was for a reason. But what does it all mean? I fear I am too late. The others know. The others are watching." Poirot felt a shiver run down his spine as he read the words. Lady Cordelia had known far more than she had ever shared. The others she mentioned. Who were they? And what was this secret that had consumed her thoughts for so long? He flipped through the pages, each entry growing more paranoid, more frantic. Lady Cordelia's obsession with the family's past had become all-encompassing. She wrote about strange dreams, about feeling watched, about voices whispering in the dark. There were mentions of an ancient ritual, one that involved the very heirloom that had been passed down through generations of the saint. Clair family. Poirot's brow furrowed as he turned to the final pages. Lady Cordelia's handwriting became increasingly erratic as she described a final terrifying revelation. "They are coming for me. I can't stop them. The key is the only way out, but I fear it is too late. I have uncovered the truth, but now I must pay the price, the curse of the saint. Claire has followed me, and there is no escaping it. I must leave. But where can I go? I must hide the key. I must hide it before they find it." Poirot closed the journal gently, his thoughts racing. It was clear now that Lady Cordelia had been caught in a web much larger than she had anticipated. The key, the heirloom, and the strange rituals were not just the ramblings of an obsessed mind. They were part of something real, something that had been hidden for centuries. The question was, who were they, and what did they want with the key? He stood there for a moment, allowing the weight of the discovery to sink in. Then, with renewed determination, Poirot knew what he had to do. He could no longer rely on the guests' statements or their explanations. It was time to confront them, to force the truth out of them. The confrontation Poirot returned to the drawing room where the guests were gathered, their faces a mixture of concern and impatience. Gerald Thompson was pacing back and forth. Sir Reginald was seated in a chair, his head in his hands, and Miss Bellamy was nervously toying with a piece of jewelry on her wrist. Dr. Barnes was nowhere to be seen. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, you've returned," Gerald said, attempting a smile, though it was strained. "Have you found anything?" Poirot gave him a sharp look. "I have found much, monsieur. But before I tell you what I know, I must first ask you, what is it that you all are hiding?" The room fell into a stunned silence. Poirot's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "You all have something to hide. Lady Cordelia's obsession with the past, her descent into madness. None of it was by accident. She uncovered something that has been buried for generations. And now, with her disappearance, I believe the time has come to reveal the truth." Gerald, now visibly unnerved, took a step back. "What truth? What are you talking about?" Poirot's gaze swept over each of them. "You all have your motives, don't you? Sir Reginald, you were in need of money. Dr. Barnes, you have your own hidden agenda. Miss Bellamy, you know more than you're letting on. And Gerald—" Poirot paused, his eyes locking with his. "You were not just a friend of Lady Cordelia's, were you? You were more than that, weren't you?" Gerald's face tightened. I don't know what you mean, Poirot." Poirot's expression hardened. "You were more than a friend, monsieur. You were her confidant. You knew about the secret, didn't you? And you knew what it could do." A flicker of fear passed across Gerald's face before he quickly masked it with a forced laugh. "You're mistaken, Poirot." "No," Poirot interrupted sharply. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And now, with Lady Cordelia gone, you think you can escape it. But you cannot. None of you can." Gerald took a step forward, his voice now shaky. "What are you saying? That we're all involved in something terrible?" Poirot met his gaze head-on. "Yes, monsieur, something terrible. And it is time for you all to confess. There is no more hiding. The final pieces." The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words hanging in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, with a deep breath, Gerald's facade cracked. "I didn't want any of this," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Poirot watched him closely, his mind piecing the narrative together. "It was never about the money, was it, monsieur? It was about power, the key to the St. Clair legacy." Poirot paused. "And its curse." Gerald's face grew pale. Yes, it was. We all believed that the key held the secret to the family's wealth, to their power. Lady Cordelia wasn't supposed to find out, but she did. And now, he trailed off, his eyes darting nervously toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "The others?" Poirot pressed. "The others are watching," Gerald said in a low voice. "They've been watching for years." Chapter 8. The Shocking Twist. The atmosphere in the drawing-room had thickened with the weight of Poirot's revelations. Gerald Thompson, once so confident and charming, now stood pale and shaking, his composure shattered. Sir Reginald and Miss Bellamy exchanged nervous glances, their once calm expressions now clouded with uncertainty. Only Dr. Barnes, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, kept his eyes trained on Poirot with an intensity that bordered on fear. Poirot, his sharp mind working at full capacity, noted every detail. He had no doubt now that the pieces were beginning to fall into place, albeit in a manner more disturbing than he could have imagined. "Gerald," Poirot began, his voice low and deliberate, "you speak of power, of a secret legacy, of watching eyes, but you have failed to see what is right in front of you. Lady Cordelia was not the only one searching for the truth. The truth, as it always does, has a way of revealing itself, and you are all connected in ways you have yet to understand." Gerald's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to speak, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "No, no, monsieur," Poirot said softly. "You have already said enough." The silence that followed was profound, each word hanging in the air like a sword suspended by a single thread. Poirot's gaze moved methodically from Gerald to Sir Reginald, and finally to Miss Bellamy, who had been trying to maintain her composure. Her lips trembled slightly, her hands clutching her bracelet as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Poirot's eyes softened for a moment before he addressed Miss Bellamy. "Mademoiselle, you know far more than you've let on. You've been involved in this far deeper than you admit, haven't you?" Miss Bellamy's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she froze, her eyes widening in shock. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, but her voice wavered, betraying her. Poirot's smile was small, but knowing. "Ah, but I do, mademoiselle. I know that you've been involved with Lady Cordelia in ways that go beyond friendship. You knew of the secret, didn't you? You were the one who pushed her to search deeper into the family's past, to uncover that which was buried." A gasp escaped from Miss Bellamy's lips, and she lowered her gaze, unable to meet Poirot's piercing eyes. It was all the confirmation he needed. "I didn't want it to go this far," Miss Bellamy whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I was afraid. Lady Cordelia's obsession with the heirloom, it became too much. She was willing to risk everything to uncover the family's darkest secret. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen." Poirot took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "Warn her? Warn her of what, mademoiselle?" "The curse," she said, her voice trembling. "The curse of the saint. Clair family. It was said to be a warning, a punishment for those who sought to unearth the family's darkest history. Lady Cordelia became obsessed with breaking the curse. But there were things she didn't understand, things that should have stayed buried." At this, Sir Reginald stood, his face a mask of anger and shame. "Enough! This is madness. What curse? What nonsense are you spouting?" Poirot turned his gaze to Sir Reginald, his voice calm but filled with authority. "Monsieur, I assure you, this is no mere nonsense. The curse is very real, and it is tied to the heirloom and the secrets of the saint. Clair family. Your family's history is tainted with more than just wealth. It is tainted with blood." Sir Reginald stiffened, his face paling. "You don't understand," he said, his voice shaky. "The curse, it's not what you think. The heirloom, it holds the key to something much more than a family legacy. It's about power, power that goes beyond money, beyond land. We We were all willing to do whatever it took to gain control of it. Poirot's gaze never left Sir Reginald. And that is why you allowed Lady Cordelia to dig deeper into the family's past? To gain control of something so dangerous? Sir Reginald's eyes darted to Miss Bellamy, and for a brief moment it was as though the truth was written in their shared glance. Yes, Sir Reginald admitted, his voice cracking. We were all desperate. All of us. Poirot's eyes flicked back to Dr. Barnes, who had remained oddly still throughout the conversation. His expression was unreadable, his lips pressed tight. Poirot could feel the weight of his gaze, as though the man were trying to suppress something dangerous. "Dr. Barnes," Poirot said, his voice calm but insistent, "you've been very quiet. What is it you're not telling me?" Dr. Barnes straightened, his eyes dark and calculating. "You don't understand, Poirot. The heirloom wasn't just a key, it was a way to unlock something far more powerful. The scent. Claire were never meant to possess it. It was a force that should never have been unleashed." Poirot's mind raced, connecting the dots in an instant. "So you were complicit in this," he said, his voice colder now. "You knew what Lady Cordelia was trying to uncover, and you encouraged it, didn't you?" Dr. Barnes didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I thought I could control it. I thought I could harness its power for myself. But I was wrong." Poirot's gaze hardened. "You thought you could control it, but it controlled you." The room was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. The twisted web of deceit was finally unraveling, but there was still one question left unanswered. What had happened to Lady Cordelia? Was she the victim of a curse, or was there something more sinister at play? Poirot turned to the others, his voice steady. "The truth is closer than you think. Lady Cordelia's disappearance is not the end of this mystery. No, it is merely the beginning." The unraveling truth Poirot's revelation had shaken the group, but the investigation was far from over. There were still pieces of the puzzle that had not yet been found. Lady Cordelia's disappearance, the heirloom, and the shadowy legacy of the saint. Clare family, these were only the beginning. "Where is Lady Cordelia?" Gerald asked, his voice raw with desperation. "What happened to her? We can't just stand here and—" "I am afraid that Lady Cordelia's fate may be far darker than any of you realize," Poirot interrupted, his voice cold. "The key to her disappearance lies not in the manor, but in what has been hidden for generations. We must search deeper, beyond the walls of this house. There are secrets that have been buried for too long." Gerald's face went pale as he looked at Poirot. "What do you mean? Where else can we look?" Poirot's eyes flicked to the door, as if he had already found the answer. "Come, monsieur. The game is far from over," Poirot said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We must go to the place where all secrets are hidden, the place where the St. Clair's legacy began." The final piece of the puzzle was still missing, but Poirot was certain of one thing. The truth would be uncovered, no matter how dark or dangerous it might be. Chapter 9. The Final Puzzle. The manor had grown eerily quiet after Poirot's last words. The once grand drawing-room now felt like a cage, its walls pressing in on the guests who remained trapped inside. The once cheerful atmosphere of the midnight tea soirée had evaporated, replaced by fear and suspicion. Poirot, ever calm, remained in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the guests. Each of them now a piece of the puzzle, each of them part of the mystery that was rapidly unfolding. He could feel the weight of their gaze on him, waiting for his next move. "We must act swiftly," Poirot said, his voice low but filled with quiet authority. "The truth is close now, but there is more to uncover. We cannot afford to waste time." Gerald, Sir Reginald, and Miss Bellamy stood together, the anxiety in their expressions clear. They had all been dragged into something they could not control, and now they were each realizing that they were more involved than they had ever imagined. "Poirot, where do we go from here?" Gerald asked, his voice shaking. "What more could there be?" "We've told you everything we know." Poirot looked at him, his gaze hardening. "You think you have told me everything, monsieur?" "No, not nearly. The truth is still hidden, and it is not just here, within these walls. We must go deeper, much deeper." He turned toward Dr. Barnes, who had been standing silently in the corner, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Dr. Barnes, you said the heirloom was connected to something far more powerful than you ever imagined. What exactly do you know about this power?" Dr. Barnes hesitated for a long moment, his face a mask of guilt. He had known all along that Lady Cordelia's obsession with the heirloom had been dangerous, but he had underestimated its true power. Now, in the face of Poirot's unyielding determination, there was nowhere left to hide. "The heirloom, Doctor," Barnes began slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "is not merely a family relic. It is an object tied to something much darker, something that has been passed down through the saint. Clair bloodline for centuries. It was said to be a key to unlocking the true power of the family, a power that was never meant to be revealed." Poirot's eyes widened. "A key? A key to what, monsieur?" Dr. Barnes swallowed hard, his voice faltering. "The saint." Clairs were believed to be the guardians of an ancient secret. The heirloom was not just a symbol of wealth or power. It was a tool used to protect something far more important. It was said that the family's fortune, its land, its legacy, all of it was tied to this secret, and whoever controlled the heirloom would control the power. The room fell silent as Poirot processed this new information. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Lady Cordelia's obsession, the strange symbols on the heirloom, the cryptic message she had left. This was no mere family heirloom. It was the key to something far more dangerous, something that had been kept hidden for centuries. "And what of Lady Cordelia?" Poirot pressed. "Did she know the full extent of this power?" Dr. Barnes nodded slowly. Yes, she had uncovered it, though she didn't fully understand what it meant. She believed the heirloom held the key to breaking the family's curse, but in truth, it was the curse itself. The family's bloodline has been cursed for generations because of their greed for power, for control over something that should never have been touched. Poirot's mind raced as he absorbed this information. The curse was not just a myth, it was a reality, one that had shaped the saint, Clair family's history, and, ultimately, their downfall. Lady Cordelia had been determined to break the curse, to free herself from the shadow that had hung over her family for so long. But in doing so, she had unwittingly set in motion events that could not be undone. "I must speak with Lady Cordelia," Poirot said, his voice filled with urgency. "If she has truly uncovered the secret, then she may be in grave danger." Gerald's face paled. "But where could she have gone?" "We've searched the entire manor, and there's no sign of her." Poirot turned sharply toward the door. "I know where she is," he said, his voice firm. "There is one place we have not looked. The place where all the family secrets were kept. The family vault. The vault." The St. Clair family vault was located beneath the manor, hidden deep within the estate. It was a place that had not been opened in decades, if not centuries. The vault was said to hold the family's most prized possessions, the heirlooms, the documents, the records of the family's history. And, according to Dr. Barnes, it was the key to understanding everything. Poirot, with the guests following closely behind, made his way down into the manor's underground passageways. The air grew colder as they descended, the stone walls seeming to close in on them. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of history, and for the first time, Poirot felt the full force of the St. Clair's curse pressing down on them. When they reached the vault's door, Poirot paused. His hand rested on the cold metal handle, and for a moment he allowed himself to absorb the gravity of the moment. The key to the mystery, to Lady Cordelia's disappearance, was just beyond this door. With a steady hand, Poirot turned the handle, and the door creaked open. Inside the vault, the dim light from their lanterns illuminated rows of shelves filled with old books, scrolls, and artifacts. But it was what lay on the far side of the room that caught Poirot's attention. There, in the center of the vault, stood a large stone pedestal, and atop it, resting in a velvet-lined box, was the heirloom, the key to everything. Poirot approached it slowly, his heart racing. As he lifted the heirloom from its resting place, the room seemed to grow colder still. The strange symbols on the heirloom glowed faintly in the dim light, and for the first time, Poirot understood the true weight of what they were dealing with. Suddenly, a noise broke the silence. The door to the vault slammed shut behind them, and a voice echoed through the room. "You should never have come here." The shocking reveal. At the sound of the voice, Poirot turned sharply, his instincts immediately on alert. There, standing in the doorway, was Lady Cordelia. But she was not the woman they had known. Her eyes were wide and filled with an unsettling intensity. Her once composed demeanor was now replaced with something darker, something dangerous. "You found the heirloom," Lady Cordelia said, her voice soft but laced with an eerie calm. "But it is too late. The curse has already begun." Poirot's mind raced. "Lady Cordelia, what have you done?" She smiled, a strange, almost haunting smile. "I have done what had to be done." The Saint. Clair bloodline is cursed, Poirot. It always has been, and now, with the heirloom in my possession, I will break the cycle. I will control it. Her words sent a chill down Poirot's spine. The game had changed. The final puzzle had fallen into place, but it was more complex and dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The air in the vault felt thick with an ominous presence as Lady Cordelia stood before them, her expression an unsettling mix of calm and something darker, something almost otherworldly. Poirot's heart raced, but his mind remained clear, calculating. He had solved countless mysteries before, but this one was unlike any other. The heirloom, the curse, Lady Cordelia's disappearance, it all led to this moment. Lady Cordelia's eyes never left the heirloom in Poirot's hands, the faint glow of the symbols casting eerie shadows on her face. Her voice was soft, almost hypnotic, as she spoke again. "You don't understand, Poirot," she said, her tone dripping with a mixture of fear and certainty. "This is not just about the family's past. It's about breaking the chains that have bound us for centuries. The power in that heirloom can release us from the curse. But it comes at a cost." Poirot's grip on the heirloom tightened. "The cost, madam, is not one I believe you are willing to pay," he said, his voice steady. "What do you intend to do with this power?" Lady Cordelia stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the heirloom in Poirot's hands. "I intend to control it," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "to harness the power of the saint. Clair legacy. I will break the curse. I will control everything. My family's wealth, their power, all of it will be mine. The bloodline's mistakes won't matter any more. I will finally be free." Poirot's mind raced as he pieced together the pieces of the puzzle. Lady Cordelia's obsession with the heirloom, her sudden disappearance, the strange behaviors and messages, it had all been leading to this moment. But what was it that had truly possessed her? What was the source of this sudden, desperate drive for power? He turned to the others, his eyes scanning their faces. Gerald, Sir Reginald, Miss Bellamy, they all stood frozen, caught between fear and confusion. Gerald, the once charming man who had hidden his desperation beneath a facade, now appeared shattered. Sir Reginald's face was pale, his hands trembling. Miss Bellamy looked on with wide eyes, her breath shallow. Poirot knew that this was the moment of reckoning, the curse of the saint. Claire's was not just a family legend, it was a reality that had consumed Lady Cordelia, twisted her, and now threatened to consume them all. "You are not alone in this, madame," Poirot said, his voice sharp. "You are not the only one who has sought the power of the heirloom. Dr. Barnes, you knew of this. You helped her uncover the secrets of your family's past. But you, too, are a part of this curse." Dr. Barnes shifted uneasily, his face hardening. "You don't understand, Poirot. I never wanted this. I thought I could control the power, but I was wrong. Lady Cordelia, she had to be stopped." Poirot turned to Dr. Barnes, his expression unwavering. "You knew, monsieur. You knew what would happen if she continued, and yet you allowed her to pursue it. You thought you could use her obsession for your own benefit, but in the end, you are just as much a part of this twisted legacy as she is." Dr. Barnes looked away, his jaw clenched tight. The guilt was written all over his face, but it was too late for remorse. The power that had been buried for centuries could no longer be contained. It had already begun to take hold. Lady Cordelia's eyes flicked from Poirot to Dr. Barnes, and for the first time she looked uncertain. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I just wanted to be free of the curse. I wanted to control my fate," but Poirot was unmoved. "You cannot control fate, madame. No one can, and neither can you control the power that comes with the heirloom. The truth is, the curse is not just about the past. It is about what happens when you try to control something you do not understand. And now you're paying the price for it." The room was silent for a long moment. The weight of Poirot's words hung in the air, suffocating the guests. The heirloom, still in Poirot's hands, seemed to pulse with an energy all its own. He could feel it now, the power that Lady Cordelia had sought to control, the power that had ensnared them all. The curse was not something that could be broken. It was something that could only be understood, accepted, and in some cases overcome, but not by force, not by obsession. Lady Cordelia had learned that too late. Poirot took a deep breath, his gaze turning to the others. "The curse has already been broken," he said softly. "It was never about the heirloom or the family's wealth. It was about the choices we make, the consequences of those choices. And now we must all face the truth of our actions." The revelation Lady Cordelia's face crumbled. She sank to her knees, the weight of her obsession finally crashing down on her. Gerald, Sir Reginald, and Miss Bellamy remained frozen, their faces a mixture of guilt, fear, and disbelief. The power of the heirloom had been within their reach, but it was no longer a source of hope. It was a reminder of everything they had lost. Poirot, ever composed, looked at them one by one. "You all played a part in this, but it is not too late to make things right. The truth will set you free, but only if you choose to face it. It is not the heirloom that defines you, but your actions. And that is where you must begin." Lady Cordelia, her face wet with tears, looked up at Poirot. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I only wanted to escape the curse. I thought the power would give me the freedom I craved." Poirot's expression softened, but his resolve remained. "Freedom does not come from power, madame. It comes from understanding, from acceptance, and from the choices we make. And that is the truth of the saint. Claire legacy, the one you must face as Lady." Cordelia's sobs filled the room. Poirot turned to the others. "You are not cursed, but you must make amends. The only way forward is to understand the truth and stop running from it." As the group stood together in the vault, surrounded by the weight of their family's secrets, Poirot knew the mystery was over. The heirloom, the key to the curse, had been returned to its rightful place, no longer an object of power, but a symbol of the truth that had been revealed. The guests, each one broken in their own way, would now have to live with the consequences of their actions. But for Lady Cordelia, and for the others, the truth had set them free in a way they had never imagined. They would have to rebuild not just their fortunes, but their lives. As Poirot left St. Clair Manor, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The mystery was solved, the curse was broken, and the guests, now forever changed, would find their own paths, whether to redemption or to ruin. The end